What if I told you that your last decision, what you ate for breakfast, what video you clicked on, even the way you're sitting right now, might not have been yours at all? Most of us live with the comforting belief that we are in control, that when we choose coffee over tea or turn left instead of right, those choices spring from some inner freedom. But what if that freedom is just an illusion? What if, before you even thought about your choice, your brain had already decided for you? This question is one of philosophy's oldest and most dangerous. Do we actually have free will? Because if the answer is no, then everything changes. Morality collapses, justice loses its meaning, and responsibility, the very thing that makes us human, becomes a mirage. Let's start small. Imagine you walk into a grocery store. You grab a box of cereal. It feels like a free choice. But psychologists will tell you that cereal wasn't really chosen. It was nudged. The bright colors, the shelf placement, the cartoon characters smiling at you, all carefully designed to hack your brain. Even the smell of the bakery at the store entrance is engineered to make you hungrier, more impulsive, more likely to choose things you didn't plan on buying. This is the everyday illusion of free will. We feel like we're making authentic choices, but beneath the surface, invisible strings are being pulled by marketing, by habit, by unconscious desires. And then comes the truly unsettling part. In the 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet ran a series of experiments. Volunteers were asked to flex their wrist whenever they felt like it, while hooked up to brain scanners. Here's what he found. The brain showed signs of preparing the movement, a readiness potential, up to half a second before the person reported deciding to move. In other words, your brain begins the decision before you are consciously aware of deciding. Later studies went further. With advanced brain imaging, scientists could predict people's decisions a full 7 to 10 seconds before they became conscious of them. Think about that. You say, "I've decided," but in reality, the decision was already made. Your consciousness just took credit for it. This raises a terrifying question. If our brains are calling the shots before we're aware, are we really the ones in control? But this isn't just a lab trick. It cuts to the core of responsibility. Imagine a man on trial. He claims his crime wasn't really his choice, that his brain, his biology, his circumstances made him do it. At first, it sounds absurd. Of course he had a choice, but when we look deeper, the line between choice and compulsion begins to blur. And this is where philosophy enters the stage. For over 2,000 years, thinkers have wrestled with this problem. From the Greeks to the Church Fathers to modern neuroscience, the same haunting question echoes. Do we really choose, or are we being carried by forces we cannot control? In this video, we're going to dive deep into the history of free will, into determinism, the idea that everything is already written, into compatibilism, the attempt to save freedom within a determined world, into religion, neuroscience, psychology, and finally, what all this means for you. And by the end, I want you to face one question. When you made your last choice, was it really yours? Let's begin with one of the most unsettling ideas in philosophy, determinism. Determinism is the claim that everything in the universe, including your thoughts, your choices, your actions, follows from prior causes. Every event is the result of a chain reaction stretching back to the beginning of time. Think of a row of dominoes falling. One tips into the next. Each move is inevitable once the first piece is pushed. Determinists argue you are just another domino. When you decided to watch this video, it wasn't really a free choice. It was the result of your mood, your history, the algorithm recommending it, the neurons firing in your brain, all of them caused by things before them. But wait, doesn't that mean that if we rewound the universe, everything would happen exactly the same way? Every thought, every laugh, every mistake, every tragedy, already written? This is the nightmare of hard determinism. And it isn't just philosophy. Modern physics, at least classical physics, leans heavily in this direction. The laws of motion don't leave room for wiggle. If you know the state of the universe now, you can, in theory, calculate everything that will ever happen. So where does that leave free will? It leaves us with a haunting possibility. Maybe we never had it in the first place. Now, philosophers didn't just accept this quietly. Theologians fought over it for centuries. St. Augustine in the 4th century argued that we must have free will, otherwise how could God judge us justly? Later, John Calvin leaned the other way, teaching predestination. According to Calvin, God had already chosen who would be saved and who would be damned. Your choices couldn't alter your fate. And this debate still rages, but under new clothing. Today, instead of God, we talk about biology. Genes shape our tendencies. Upbringing shapes our habits. Neuroscience shows our brains preparing decisions before we're aware. The new determinism is not divine. It's biological. But maybe you're thinking, okay, fine, maybe we're influenced by causes, but surely I still choose. After all, I feel like I choose. And this is where things get complicated. Philosophers split into camps. On one side, hard determinists. They say free will doesn't exist at all. Every act is caused, and our sense of freedom is just a comforting illusion. On the other, libertarians. Not the political kind, the philosophical kind. They argue we must have real freedom, or else morality and justice make no sense. And then, in the middle, compatibilists. Thinkers like David Hume argued that maybe free will and determinism are not enemies. Maybe freedom is not the absence of cause, but the ability to act according to your own motivations, even if those motivations are themselves caused. Think of it like this. A man is in prison. He cannot leave. He is not free. But when you decide to walk outside instead of staying in, no one is forcing you. You're following your will, even if your will was shaped by causes before you. This softer definition tries to rescue responsibility. You're free as long as your action flows from you and not from an external chain dragging you unwillingly. But does that really save freedom? Or is it just redefining it to make us feel better? Because if even your desires are caused by your biology and environment, then are they really yours? And here's where things get dark. If determinism is true, if you are just a chain of causes, then responsibility evaporates. A murderer could say, "It wasn't me. It was my genes, my brain chemistry, my upbringing, my neurons firing." And he'd be right. A hero could say, "I chose courage." But did he? Or was he simply the kind of person who, because of causes stretching back before his birth, was fated to act bravely? This is the philosophical abyss. If all is determined, then guilt and pride, reward and punishment become illusions. And yet, our entire civilization is built on the idea of responsibility. Without it, law collapses, morality collapses. Even love, which depends on the idea of choosing another, begins to crumble. So the question is unavoidable. If we don't have free will, how can we live as if we do? Now let's step out of philosophy for a moment and look at science, because in the last 50 years, neuroscience has entered the debate, and what it's uncovered is deeply unsettling. In the 1980s, Benjamin Libet conducted a now famous experiment. Participants were asked to flex their wrist whenever they felt like it. Meanwhile, their brain activity was monitored. Here's the shocking part. The brain showed readiness potential, signals of preparing to move, hundreds of milliseconds before the participants reported deciding. In other words, their brains decided before their minds did. This experiment has been repeated, refined, criticized, but the pattern remains. Your sense of deciding may just be your consciousness catching up to what your brain has already chosen. And if that's true, what does it mean for free will? It means your freedom might be like a movie played backward. You feel like you're choosing in the moment, when in fact the decision was already made and you're just narrating after the fact. Some neuroscientists go further. They argue consciousness itself is just the storyteller, explaining what the brain already did. That I, who thinks it chooses, is just a voiceover, not the director. If that's true, then the entire drama of free will may be an illusion. But pause here. Not everyone accepts this conclusion. Some argue the brain signals Libet measured aren't decisions at all, just general noise before action. Others argue we may still have a last-moment veto, the ability to stop an action before it completes. Maybe free will doesn't mean initiating every thought. Maybe it means being able to resist them. Still, the challenge stands. Every day, neuroscience uncovers more ways our behavior is driven by hidden processes, impulses shaped by dopamine, biases coded by evolution, habits written by upbringing. So the haunting question remains: when you choose, is it really you choosing, or a machine of flesh and neurons doing what it must?
Experiment, that's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here, please.
Continue, please. Go right on.
I refuse to go on. Let me out.
The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue.
Participants didn't know that the learner was really an actor, and the so-called sharks harmless.
Lines.
You're gonna get a shot.
Your task is a very simple one. You're to look at the line on the left and determine which of the three lines on the right is equal to it in length. All right, we'll proceed in this order.
Only one of the people in the group is. Ash found subjects went along with the group on 37% of the critical trials. But he found through interviews that they went along with the group for different reasons.
One.
They must be right. There are four of them and one of me.
One.
This subject's yielding is based on a distortion of his judgment. He genuinely believes that the group is correct.
Remember the obedience experiments of Milgram? 2 out of 3 participants willing to deliver lethal shocks just because someone in authority said so. Or the conformity experiments of Ash? 3 out of 4 people doubting their own eyes just to fit in with the crowd. What do these show us? That our choices are disturbingly easy to manipulate. Authority, pressure, context, they all steer us more than we admit. So maybe the question of free will isn't just whether we're determined by physics, but also whether we're enslaved by psychology. If we are creatures so easily nudged, so predictably swayed, is that really freedom, or just the illusion of it? And yet, here's the twist. Even if all this is true, our brains predetermined, our choices manipulated, there's still a stubborn fact. We feel free. The lived experience of agency, the sense of choosing, of responsibility, doesn't vanish just because science questions it. We can't escape it. You still hesitate before decisions. You still weigh options. You still feel guilt when you do wrong and pride when you do right. So maybe the deeper question isn't, do we have free will? Maybe it's, what does it mean to live as if we do? Because whether or not freedom is an illusion, the consequences of believing in it are real. Societies that deny free will collapse into fatalism. Individuals who deny it fall into despair, but those who affirm it, illusion or not, live with responsibility, with creativity, with hope. And here's where philosophy circles back. The determinist may be right. The neuroscientist may be right. Perhaps we are dominoes, falling as we must. But even dominoes can fall beautifully. That's the paradox. Even if everything is determined, it may still matter how we live, because meaning itself is something we create in the act of living it. And hey, if you've made it this far, it probably means you're enjoying the ride. Which raises a funny question. Was that really your free choice? Or were you determined to keep watching all along? Either way, here's one choice you can make consciously. Hit that subscribe button. Those who do clearly exercised free will. And those who don't? Well, maybe the universe decided they'd ignore me.
Let's bring this debate down to earth. Because philosophy isn't just abstract, it's about how we live. And the problem of free will shapes some of the most important parts of human life: morality, justice, love, and identity. Start with morality. If every choice you make was determined before you were born, by genes, by upbringing, by physics, can we really blame anyone for anything? When someone commits a crime, are they evil or unlucky? Born with the wrong wiring, raised in the wrong conditions, pushed by forces they never chose. This is why the free will debate haunts the courtroom. The law depends on responsibility. But if no one has true freedom, is punishment ever justified? Some philosophers argue, yes, even if no one is ultimately responsible, punishment can still serve a purpose. It protects society. It deters crime. It rehabilitates offenders. Responsibility, then, becomes not metaphysical, but practical. But others argue this strips away the very idea of justice. If no one truly chooses, then every prison is filled with victims, people caught in a causal chain they never wrote. And that's a disturbing thought. Now consider love. When you say to someone, "I love you," does it matter if that love was predetermined? If the only reason you love them is because your neurons, your childhood, and your environment made it so, is it still love? Some say yes. Love is no less beautiful for being determined. A rose is no less beautiful because it must bloom. Others say no. Love only matters if it's freely chosen. If you couldn't help but love them, is that really love at all? Then there's identity. Who are you, if not the sum of your choices? Take away free will, and what's left? A bundle of causes, a machine of matter and memory, an echo of forces you never chose. That's not just philosophy, that's an existential crisis. And yet, many thinkers believe we can escape the trap. Compatibilists, for example, argue that free will and determinism can coexist. How? They say freedom doesn't mean escaping causality. It means acting according to your desires, your reasons, your values, even if those too were shaped by the world. In this view, you are free when you act from yourself, even if the self has causes. You didn't choose your nature, but your actions still flow from it. That is enough for responsibility. That is enough for meaning. It's not the radical freedom Sartre dreamed of, but it's a freedom compatible with science, with psychology, with the messy reality of human life. And perhaps that's all we need, because whether we are cosmic accidents or determined dominoes, we still live, breathe, and choose as if our choices matter. step into the world of existentialism, because no philosophy wrestles with freedom more directly or more painfully than this one. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Man is condemned to be free." Think about that. Not blessed with freedom. Condemned. Why condemned? Because freedom isn't just possibility, it's burden. If you are free, then every choice is yours. Every mistake, every regret, every path not taken. You can't blame fate. You can't blame God. You can't even blame society. Freedom means the responsibility is crushing. This is the existential weight of free will. When you realize there is no script, no predetermined meaning, only you, choosing, moment by moment, life becomes terrifying, because suddenly there are no excuses. But here's the paradox. Sartre and his fellow existentialists believed this terrifying truth is also the source of our dignity. Yes, freedom condemns us, but it also makes us human. It gives us the power to define ourselves, to write our lives, to create meaning where none is given. Then there's Albert Camus. He wasn't so sure. For Camus, the world is absurd. We long for meaning, but the universe offers silence. We long for freedom, but our lives are hemmed in by chance, by death, by absurdity. So what do we do? Camus gives us his famous image, Sisyphus, condemned to roll his stone forever. And yet, he imagines Sisyphus happy, not because he escapes the burden, but because he accepts it, because even in absurdity, he chooses defiance. That's the existential response to the problem of free will. Even if determinism is true, we must live as if we're free. Even if the universe is absurd, we must create our own meaning. It's a strange freedom, not absolute, not scientific, but existential. A freedom that exists in the very act of choosing, even if the choice is meaningless in the cosmic sense. And here's the twist. This kind of freedom doesn't dissolve responsibility. It deepens it. Because if there is no higher script, no grand design, no divine judge, then responsibility falls entirely on us. We can't hide behind God's plan. We can't hide behind just following orders. We can't hide behind "I had no choice." Existential freedom strips away every excuse. It leaves you naked in front of your decisions. That's why Sartre called it a condemnation. Because freedom is heavy, but also liberating.
And Benjamin Libet's work was one of the few experiments which made a truly innovative and courageous attempt to address that question. When you intend and will to, I want you to press either this key or this key.
Just as in Libet's original work, this experiment seems to show that my brain begins to prepare for movement long before I felt like I had consciously decided to move.
Now, let's leave philosophy for a moment. Because in the last few decades, science has stepped into the debate, and the results have shaken the very foundations of free will. It starts with a series of strange experiments. In the 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet asked volunteers to do something simple: flex their wrist whenever they felt like it, and tell him the exact moment they became aware of deciding. Meanwhile, he recorded their brain activity. Here's the shocking discovery. Libet found that the brain showed signs of preparing to move, milliseconds before the person reported making the decision. In other words, the brain decided before the conscious mind knew it. Think about what that means. When you reach for a glass of water, when you decide to speak, when you feel the impulse to stand up, your brain may have already set the gears in motion, long before you claim the choice. If that's true, what does it mean for free will? Maybe consciousness is just a narrator, telling the story of a choice after it's already been made. But it gets deeper. Modern brain scans have extended Libet's work. Some experiments suggest scientists can predict your decisions seconds before you become aware of them, just by watching brain activity. Seconds, not milliseconds, seconds. That's unsettling, because it suggests that the freedom you feel, the sense of "I'm in control," may just be an illusion. Your brain, not yourself, might be running the show. By the way, if your brain already decided to like this video before you even thought about it, don't fight it. Go ahead and click that like button. Consider it neuroscientifically approved. So, are we puppets of our neurons? Is free will dead? Not so fast. Critics of Libet point out that his experiments were about trivial choices, like moving a wrist, not about life-shaping decisions. And even then, people could still veto their movements at the last moment. That means consciousness might not initiate every choice, but it might still have the power to stop one. The power of no. And maybe that's what free will really is. Not the power to create choices out of nothing, but the power to resist, the power to interrupt, to reflect, to say, wait, no, not this. That interpretation saves a fragment of freedom, but it's not the heroic freedom philosophers once imagined. It's fragile, it's delayed, it's easily bypassed. And that fragility raises a terrifying possibility. If neuroscience proves our choices are determined before we're aware, then what happens to responsibility? What happens to guilt, to punishment, to morality itself? Because if every crime, every act of kindness, every betrayal and every sacrifice is just the inevitable unfolding of brain states, how can we praise or blame anyone at all? This is the modern crisis of free will. Philosophy asked the question for millennia. Science has now put it under the microscope. And the answers only make it stranger.